I wanted to interview somebody that I really thought could bring immediate value to a business plan that was both built on success, but really readily achievable. I feel like entrepreneurs typically look towards kind of the big idea, the big investment, the dropping everything. And, I think there's opportunity for habitual value creation. And I found a couple who happened to be my in laws that represented, I think, that value that I wanted to bring back into my own life. So, why interview Jim and Diane? I think at the heart of entrepreneurship is value creation. Looking at Jim and Diane and interviewing them, I was very surprised at how much they are able to produce on their family garden. Every year, the average American consumes almost 50 pounds of potatoes and over 30 pounds of tomatoes. And Jim and Diane, for instance, actually produce 500 pounds of potatoes, 200 pounds of tomatoes, and they had a family of 4. So they were definitely overproducing for their family. And that didn't include the fact that they have carrots, onions, kale, corn, onions. The list kind of goes on and definitely fluctuates with the season. But I didn't get a total amount that they produce every year, but it far exceeds what the average American consumes in terms of produce. Local co-op, for instance, sells those high quality ingredients, tomatoes being an example, for $4 a pound. So there is significant value in the work that they're doing that could potentially expand. But I wanted to see if Jim and Diane actually considered what they had as a business. So I asked them the simple question, do you consider this a business or a hobby? They chose option C, which was a family health investment that saves us a ton of money. So uh, the financial investment, I think I may have highlighted this a little bit earlier, but the barrier to entry on this particular venture is fairly low. If you're looking at the fixed costs, you have a couple $100 in what Jim says was the best investment, which was a rototiller, a used rototiller, and then looking at those typical tools, shovel, rake, storage tanks, watering can, and then harvesting essentials, which started, like I said, with a large pot and some jars, but looking at the dehydrator, pressure canner, brake bleeder pump, and all of that really still comes right at $1,000. So pretty low investment for the amount of yield. Recurring annual cost is about $200. Heirloom seeds in bulk, he looks for that in particular, usually comes out around $50. And then packaging is another recurring cost, but something that I'll highlight a little bit later, something you can use smartly in terms of reuse or, reuse. Other labor, you can't ignore the labor for this effort, but it was actually much lower than I would have thought. Jim says he spends about 30 minutes every single day, an absolute critical thing you can't really skip, or you're going to make that up later and probably actually add on labor if you skip a day. And then there's kind of a surge season, which Diane comes in and helps, which really comes up to approximately 300 hours a year. I personally think that estimate was low, but that was what they had estimated. Diane will say that she's worth $275 an hour because that's what she charges hourly as a CPA. Jim, since this is his hobby, says it's for free. So, what are the keys to success? I think probably one you've noticed and one they've highlighted is really how can you be resourceful with what you've got. They started out really young couple, didn't have much, and they found one of the keys was how do we have low maintenance equipment. The rototiller, I didn't mention the maintenance costs, but it's very minimal and it's probably every 10 years. They've been at this for 45. And then, Diane mentioned you don't always have to get the fancy appliances, especially for what they needed. She actually uses a manual hand pump brake bleeder to vacuum seal everything that she has because, she's been using the same $20 device for years on end and never has had a problem. She does hand off that effort to Jim when her hands get tired, but essentially that's been something that she really highlighted. In terms of what Jim does, he really focuses on recycling his seeds, and a lot of that comes down to he found the perfect plant, and so he can repeat that quality, but then he saves a lot of money every year. For instance, he only uses his own tomato seeds now, which is one of his highest yielding products. Let's see. Another one, learn from others. Jim will emphasize this time and time again. He's learned best when he's asked questions, and actually, again, went back to the trial and error based on the questions and the things he's learned. What started this and what I didn't emphasize, I think, enough is Jim and Diane really care about the quality of their produce. Actually, at this point, not only do they not need it, but they really can't stand produce bought at the store because it just doesn't taste nearly as good. So they care very deeply about their soil. That's something that most of that labor goes into. And they really care about not using pesticides or chemicals, artificial fertilizers. And that takes a significant amount of work to keep all of those pests out of the garden. Finally, not quite finally, but I think part of this is building in habits. A little goes a long way in terms of that daily 30 minutes. And even Diane, who does offer that search support, she also puts in work daily to collect the manure from her horses to add it to the compost. So it can be probably an initial difficult venture, but once you get into the habit, that garden is going to keep producing for you. That work is really going to pay off. And finally, take advantage of opportunities. This is one that I didn't really have the time to focus on, but Jim and Diane not only work on their home garden and produce, but they also have owned animals and livestock. So that's included beef, pork, and then they also have poultry. But I'll highlight the beef. They actually didn't have a plan to have cattle, but they actually had a neighbor who bought way too many, didn't have the land to sustain them, and had requested, kind of out of desperation, to graze his cattle on Jim and Diane's land. And what they ended up working out is they fattened up the cattle with the hay they were growing on the property and actually kept all of the calves, and 6 of those cows were pregnant. So, all of those cattle went back to their home fat and happy, and Jim and Diane kept those 6 cattle, which really go for $4,000 a piece in terms of beef. So what are my key takeaways? I think the biggest one for me is maximize the value of your available resources. Jim and Diane have been at this for 45 years. Their garden and their output didn't really come to be overnight. So, years in the making to get, I think, the soil to the level that it needed to be to have the yields that they have today. But they made the most of what they had, all while maintaining their day-to-day jobs. So Jim did retire early, so he was able to put more time into the garden, but Diane owned and operated her own CPA firm, and I had planned to interview her on top of this one, just kind of to put some meat on this interview, but to be honest, they gave me enough content just focusing on their family farm. Secondly, a family health investment can start to be a formal business investment. The very first slide, I talked to how much Jim and Diane were producing versus what the average family actually consumes. And the truth is, Jim and Diane give away a ton of produce just because it gives them satisfaction to give it to their in-law. That's me. Every year they drive down a whole truckload of dehydrated goods, and that is greatly appreciated, and that goes for my sister-in-law as well. But that could actually be something that they sell and don't. And I think that's mostly because they already have a business, which is that CPA firm. And for Jim, this is a really valuable hobby. And then finally, really, I think I learned what a successful home grower is. It's fun. It's saving you tons of money. and it has flavor. So